My name is Casey Aldridge, and I tend to introduce myself as an eco-socialist and the youth pastor at Pennington Presbyterian Church here in New Jersey. For much of last April and May, we were told that nature was healing. What nature referred to specifically remained rather amorphous, but we saw images of Kashmiri goats reclaiming the empty Welsh streets of Llandudno during the United Kingdom's first national lockdown against the coronavirus pandemic. We saw people reporting images of dolphins and sharks in urban canals, and India's major cities recorded some of its best air quality in years as industrial production and travel came to a halt. Certainly, as anthropologist Nayanika Mathur noted last June, there had been a 17% drop in greenhouse gas emissions by the mid-year point. Nevertheless, the sobering fact is that 83% of carbon emissions remained, and as Mathur demonstrates, we are still very far from reaching the Paris Agreement figures. Even the world coming to an absolute standstill has not been enough to knock humanity off its ecologically destructive and extractive course. To talk about environmental justice, however, demands that we discard linguistic generalities. We can't talk of nature in the abstract. We can't say that nature is healing when almost 2 million people globally have died of COVID-19, when, as Mathur suggests, there's a direct line of causality between the bluer sky that we are seeing and the deaths and mass suffering unleashed by a hastily imposed, ill-planned, and ultimately failed lockdown in India. Mathur wrote that the cleaner air that she was inhaling in big Indian cities is being paid with, quite literally, the blood of the poor. Another anthropologist, scholar, activist, and friend of mine is Brian McNeil, who introduced me to environmental justice organizing in 2012. Brian has studied Appalachian resistance to big coal and the catastrophic process of mountaintop removal, wherein capitalists blow up entire mountains in order to extract dirty coal, leaving scorched earth where forests and vibrant natural ecosystems once existed. Mountaintop removal decimates biodiversity and pollutes watersheds, and the stark visual contrast of witnessing large mining operations where mountains once stood is jarring. But I remember Brian saying that the question is not whether or not we'll save the earth. This rock will continue to revolve around the sun for millennia, until one day it is swallowed up by the sun in about 7.5 billion years. What eco-socialists like myself are fighting for isn't the fate of the planet, but the planet's ability to support life. And more than that, we are fighting for a quality of life for all people. I am wearing a Sunrise Movement shirt, and the youth-led organizing of the Sunrise Movement not only gives me hope for the future, but inspires the way I think about youth ministry. Nevertheless, I believe that the Sunrise Movement's timeline is just a little bit off. Sunrise was launched after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change announced in 2018 that we had only 12 years left to avert climate catastrophe. But climate catastrophe is already here. It has been here. What is climate catastrophe if not more than 500,000 people in Oregon, more than 10% of that state's population, fleeing wildfires this last September? What does climate catastrophe mean if not the 3,000 Puerto Ricans killed during and after Hurricane Maria, or the more than 1,800 deaths a decade and a half ago in Hurricane Katrina? What is climate catastrophe if not the mass extinction event Earth is currently experiencing, losing 52% of all wildlife in the last 40 years? And the impact of climate change is the primary driver of migration trends from Central America to the United States, as conditions for farming become increasingly volatile. As we think about George Floyd or Eric Garner or Elijah McClain's final words before they were murdered by police officers, we have to think also about how white supremacy and racially segregated neighborhoods are forms of climate apartheid as well. A 2017 Princeton study confirmed that higher rates of asthma in Black communities has everything to do with the built environment of the United States, and New Jersey in particular. This state's industrial history, that study said, means many Black residents live near pollution sources or close to highways that produce harmful soot. And housing in these areas is, on average, 7 years older than housing elsewhere. The environment is not something out there, a ticking time bomb 10 years off. The disaster is with us already, exported with toxic first world waste to poor countries and the global south. It is with us already in the construction of pipelines along sacred indigenous land. In the film Beasts of the Southern Wild, young Quvenzhané Wallace's character says after a flood that for all the animals that didn't have a dad to put them in the boat, the end of the world happened already. We are a people who believe in resurrection, but are also instructed not to put God to the test. We can't rely on the promise of new life, a new heaven, or a new earth to bail us out of ecological and humanitarian crises that we have engineered. Nature is not going to heal on its own, nor would the resurrection of nature mean anything if it kept systems of racial apartheid and class domination intact. But we can fight mountaintop removal. We can combat tar sands pipelines on native land. We can support local farmers and sustainable agriculture. We can demand energy and waste solutions that protect Black, immigrant, and working class neighborhoods, both here in New Jersey and in the global South. We can have environmental justice if we combat environmental racism, but we can't have environmentalism or racial justice alone.